Every act of perception should be regarded as a gamble. And from the experiments I've done and the experiments I've led in my workshops and seminars, that has become overwhelmingly obvious and true to me. Every perception is a gamble. Just think you're walking down the street in a big city. You see a face half a block away. If you think it's a friend of yours, you get a little closer, it's a total stranger. All perception operates on gambles. You pick up a few details, you fill in the rest. And if the guy never comes any closer, you're not sure whether you saw an old friend or somebody who just looked a little bit like an old friend.
How does that relate directly to our political freedom, though?
The main trouble with Marxist parties is they think that Das Kapital has all the answers in it. The major problem with the United States is that about 50% of the population at least thinks the Bible has all the answers in it. And then there are libertarians who think Ludwig von Mises has all the answers. Except for the ones who think Ayn Rand has all the answers. If you think there's one book that has the answers, you're never going to really discover anything, and you're never going to think an original thought. If you find out there's 12 books with different answers, you're almost forced to start thinking. So I feel Internet is forcing more and more people to do something they've never done in their lives before, which is try to make an independent judgment, how to judge between alternatives.
We've mainly been talking about American politics. What about world politics right now? How do you see that going?
Well, I think the East-West conflict is being replaced by a North-South conflict. I think more and more the darker parts of the globe are struggling to become more independent of the International Monetary Fund and the World Bank and the whole complex that Bucky Fuller calls MMAO, Machiavelli, Mafia, Atoms, and Oil. As a matter of fact, Michio Kaku, the physicist, he said he quit working for the government when he discovered that most of the Star Wars technology was aimed at third world countries and not at the Soviet Union at all. That the United States already figured they had the Soviet Union buffalo even before the Cold War ended. They were getting ready for wars with the Southern Hemisphere, which would be in purely imperialistic wars, although, of course, the mass media will never admit it. It'll always be a war for freedom and God and the American way and apple pie and good old mom. But basically, they're all wars to maintain the power of the major corporations and banks.
So the story of the 20th century continues.
Yeah, but as Asia and Africa come online, I see a global brain forming. I didn't invent that metaphor. It's been used by quite a few people. I think as information travels faster and faster and more and more directions, that we're going to develop a global system, not necessarily a world government, but some kind of world governance, let's say. A confederation of some sort, where everybody will be fairly equally represented. I know it sounds utopian, but hell, the Constitution sounded utopian, and it worked for a while. I think the European and Canadian and most of the civilized world, I think most of them have gone a long way down the path I think we have to go in order to have a peaceful and prosperous planet. I think you find more of the United States Constitution alive in Europe and Canada than you do in the United States right now. But I think the United States will eventually rediscover the Constitution. It does exist. You can find it in the back of the dictionary. The Tsar hasn't ordered it taken out of the dictionaries yet. Well, that might be the next step. I would say the Scandinavian countries please me more than any others on the planet right now. And France and Germany are moving more and more on that. So even Portugal is moving in that direction. Hell, they legalized abortion in Spain. I think they just legalized marijuana in Portugal. The world is moving toward a saner system, but I think the United States will be the last one to move because the power groups here are so entrenched and so committed to a very reactionary philosophy.
But do you think that the United States as the center, more or less, of the Internet will reap any of those benefits before other countries?
Oh yeah, to some extent. I think the growing skepticism about the government, which, as I pointed out in my book, Everything is Under Control, Around 75% of the population doesn't trust the government anymore. I used to feel like a lone eccentric in distrusting the government. Now it turns out I'm part of the majority. 75% of the population doesn't trust the government. I think that's chiefly due to internet. Because on the internet you get hundreds of different viewpoints, whereas in the corporate media you only get one viewpoint. Or you cover the whole spectrum, as Noam Chomsky likes to say. They give you the whole spectrum from far right to middle of the road, so you feel you're getting a variety. That's the newspapers. TV doesn't even go that far. They only give you one viewpoint, the far right.
Yeah, I noticed that particular statistic, that it's a 1996 survey showing 3 out of 4 Americans believe the government is basically constantly involved in nefarious activities and conspiracies. You think the internet has caused this change?
Well, yeah, mostly, I think, yeah. I mean, the most outrageous charges against the government can be found on internet. They seldom get into the major media. There was a reporter on the San Jose Mercury News who did a series of articles on the CIA's involvement in the cocaine business, about which there's been at least a dozen books already. And a week later, the San Jose Mercury News printed an editorial saying the stories were inaccurate, and they fired him. He has since written another book about the subject, adding to the vastly growing library about the CIA and cocaine, and he goes around lecturing about it. And I've read a lot of these books. If I was on the jury, I'd vote guilty if the CIA were on trial as a major coke dealer. But you can't get it into the major media.
So this is an example of a conspiracy theory that is still up in the air in terms of the verdict, but you actually believe it to be real and true.
Like I said, if I were on the jury, I'd vote guilty, knowing what I know now. Of course, if I were on the jury, I'd have to listen to the case for the defense, too, and I might change my mind.
Still, conspiracy theory seems to be the thing that you're best known for.
Alas.
How is it that conspiracy theory intrigues you so much?
Well, it's like internet. It forces you to consider alternatives. Well, if you have a book by a conspiracy theorist and accept it as the holy writ, you can spend the rest of your life spreading that conspiracy theory and annoying everybody who doesn't believe it and pounding on the table. But by God, look at this document right here and all that stuff. But by and large, on internet, if you go into alt.conspiracy, you'll find 80 different conspiracy theories fighting it out among one another, and you're forced to start thinking, do any of these make any sense? Is there one that makes more sense than the others? Are some of them partly true, some of them mostly false? You got to start thinking in non-aristotelian categories, not just quick true, false, but how much of this is true? Like Holy Blood, Holy Grail, which was a bestseller about 20 years ago. I was really shocked when a friend of mine said he found 3 things in it that weren't true, so he knew the whole book was a hoax. My attitude towards that book is like my attitude towards everything else. How much of it is true? Now, is it true? Is it all true? Is it all false? That seems like childish questions to me. The question is how much of it can be proven to be true and how much of it is just guesswork or bluff by the authors. It's about the priory of science. An affinity group or conspiracy, whichever words you prefer, of French aristocrats and bankers. Such an organization does exist. Whether their explanation of what this organization is up to is true or false, that I think is debatable, but I think they prove the organization exists. And the Church of Mary Magdalene, which is a central part of their conspiracy, that exists. I've even spoken to somebody who's been there. I haven't been there myself yet, so that's hearsay, but still, he's a guy I trust.
So obviously there are things in the book that can be shown to be true.
Yeah, and there are some things in the book I think can be proven pretty clearly to be untrue. And then there's the large class that belongs in what von Neumann called the maybe state, in between true and false. You just don't have enough evidence to make a judgment.
So is that sort of the nut or the crux about conspiracy theory for you, is that it helps keep the mind open?
First of all, I think a lot of conspiracies do go on. I agree with historian Carl Oglesby, a multitude of conspiracies contend in the night. I think it's normal mammalian behavior. On the other hand, conspiracy buffs tend to be somewhere between mildly paranoid and full-blown clinical paranoid, and I don't trust many of them very much. I think the only conspiracy theorists I really take seriously are Buckminster Fuller, Noam Chomsky, and Carl Oglesby, and all the rest of them seem in varying degrees of paranoia.
But you don't feel that it's the whole field is just simply paranoid fantasy?
Absolutely not. The idea that conspiracies don't occur is like saying snow never happens. It's contradicted by all the facts of history. You pick up any book of history and you find they're talking about conspiracies in ancient Rome, conspiracies in Renaissance Italy, conspiracies within the British government in the Elizabethan age. History is largely a history of conspiracies. To claim conspiracies don't exist is it's an article of faith, like the Darwinian idea that there's no intelligence anywhere and everything happened by accident. Or the Christian idea that a guy named Yahweh built the whole universe, or living on a cloud a few miles above Israel and sending fire and brimstone down on everybody who infuriated him, or seriously vexed him, I should say.
You distinguish between fungible and non-fungible in relationship to conspiracy theory. Can you explain those terms?
Fungible is a legal term. It's related to the RICO law. Well, it originally started in mercantile law. A product is fungible if every part of it is the same. Like if you're selling corn and it's 90% corn and 10% junk you found in the backyard, it's non-fungible. Gold brick, it looks like it's solid gold, but it's mostly lead. That was a very popular swindle in the 19th century. The theory of fungibility, as I apply it to conspiracy theories, is when people go really bonkers and they say every member of the group is equally evil and they're all involved in the conspiracy and you can't trust any of them, etc. That's the kind of thing that Adolf Hitler taught. And I think those theories are always crazy, whether they pick on the Jews or the Jesuits or the Freemasons or whoever they pick out. I don't believe in fungible conspiracies. There are degrees of involvement. Is he witting? That's a question they use a lot in the CIA. That means how much does he know about what he's doing? Another useful term to remember is useful idiot. I think that started in British intelligence. A useful idiot is somebody who's working for an intelligence agency but doesn't know it. The theories I find really dangerous are like anti-Semitism, which led to unprecedented horrors in this century, and horrors on lesser scales because they had lesser technology throughout the history of Christendom. And I find a lot of feminism to be equally nefarious in implication, although they haven't had enough power to do anything about it. But some of the feminists, when they talk about men, they sound just like Adolf Hitler talking about Jews. It's really scary. The parallel is so damn close. And then there are these theories where all the Freemasons in the world are part of one gigantic conspiracy for the Freemasons to take over everything and run everything. I know too many Freemasons to take that seriously. Freemasons are as miscellaneous a group as the Presbyterians, the plumbers. You find all sorts of people in the Freemasons, and they don't all have the same ideas.
So the way you use the term, it means a kind of absolute blanket generalization about any group.
It's treating a group as homogeneous. Homogeneous would be a good synonym for fungible.
So you feel we can throw those conspiracies out just based on their fungibility?
On the face of it, everybody has different fingerprints. There are no two brains that are alike. So the idea that you can make generalizations about a large and miscellaneous group and they'll be true about every member of that group, that I think is the most nefarious form of stupidity on the planet.
Well, what's so interesting with that particular form of conspiracy theory is that it contains what you call a strange loop.
Oh, yeah, when you say Bertrand Russell looked into the evidence and concluded that the bankers of Europe consisted 90% of Gentiles and only 10% of Jews. So the Jewish bankers' conspiracy is a myth, and they'll come back with Bertrand Russell was Jewish himself. He changed his name. Then you got to try to prove that Bertrand Russell wasn't Jewish. I actually got into that argument once with somebody about Hugh Hefner. They were convinced he was Jewish. All pornography is created by Jews. Hefner is a pornographer, therefore Hefner is Jewish. I told him he's a Presbyterian. No, he changed his name. Sartre is the only one who's ever commented on this the delight in being stupid. If you make up your mind you're going to defend a really stupid position, you can get every intelligent person in the room hopping mad. No matter how rational they think they are, they'll eventually get it. They'll get more emotional than you are if you just keep repeating the same stupid thing. This is in an essay he wrote called The Anti-Semite and the Jew. And if you're not Jewish and you try to argue with an anti-Semite about his prejudices, the next thing you know, you are yelling and shouting and acting like a fanatic more than he is, because he's saying so many stupid things like, you must be Jewish yourself. Now, how about you? Well, then your wife is Jewish and she's corrupted you. No, my wife isn't Jewish either. Well, then it was your grandfather. And, you know, when you get into this infinite regress like that, eventually you lose your temper, and then you feel you're as dumb as the guy you're arguing with. Oliver Wendell Holmes called that the hydrostatic principle of controversy. The fools drag everybody down to their own level. Well, Sartre noticed this particularly in anti-Semites. But I've noticed it in all sorts of dogmatic people that hold this strain, like the flat earthers. You get into an argument with a flat earther, and I guarantee you lose your temper before he loses his, because he's enjoying being stupid. He's enjoying making you angry just by sticking to a position which he knows nobody else can believe. That also gives you a feeling of belonging to the elite. Everybody else is too stupid to see the truth, but I belong to the small group that knows the truth. After you believe that, you're ready when the leader says, here's your cyanide Kool-Aid, have a drink. You go, oh yeah, sure. And you swallow it all down.
Do you believe that most conspiracy theory or conspiracy theorists are working from a basis of a rational and logical will to determine the facts of a situation? You know, is it scientific, or is this completely some kind of emotional?
Well, it covers the gamut. It's I like to think of things on a scale of 1 to 10. And I would say some conspiracy theories on a scale from 1 to 10, where 1 is sanity and 10 is total raving lunacy, certifiably insane, as they say. I would say most conspiracy theorists are somewhere above 5 on that scale, and a lot of them have reached 10. But there are some that are pretty close to 1, like Carl Oglesby and a couple of other offbeat historians, Noam Chomsky, Buckminster Fuller, and me. Like I said, everything is under control. Conspiracy theories help make sense out of what otherwise seems a senseless world. That's why so many people believe them, including me sometimes.
How much do you think our own government operates on the basis of conspiracy theory?
Well, I think they worry about conspiracies more than most conspiracy buffs do. I think the government is full of people with guilty consciences, and they're constantly worried we're going to find out what they're really up to. And so they hire more and more spies to spy on us, to find out what we're doing and saying, to see if we're getting to be a real menace to them. And of course, that means they need more spies to spy on their spies, in case some of their spies are double agents, which is well known in the whole espionage business. So then they need a third order of spies to spy on the second order of spies, and eventually you end up with somebody like J. Edgar Hoover, who uses his power to blackmail the presidents of the United States. Stalin murdered 3 chiefs of the secret police in a row because they found out too much about his own secrets. And nobody murdered J. Edgar Hoover, at least I don't think so. I think he died of natural causes. But he was blackmailing presidents from Roosevelt on. He blackmailed every president who wanted to do something Hoover didn't. Like Nixon said in one of the Watergate tapes, well, Hoover performed. He would have scared hell out of them. He's got a file on everybody. He just sensed the envy in Nixon. He wanted a file on everybody, too. He was a rank amateur. Hoover had been at it for 50 years by then. And a lot of the files disappeared the day he died, by the way. Nobody will admit they know what happened to them. Somebody has those files and is still blackmailing people. The government is more afraid of us than we are of them. That's what I always emphasize when I'm talking to radical groups who think their phones are tapped. Well, of course your phone is tapped. If you've done anything to annoy the government, your phone is tapped. They've probably got a mail cover on you, too. But that just shows they're more afraid of you than you are of them. The government doesn't trust the people. And then they wonder why the people don't trust the government. Well, the people don't trust the government because they know we're being spied on all the time. At the last count I heard, there were over 200,000 lawyers working for the federal government. And you know how much harm a single lawyer can do. A single lawyer can ruin your whole life, you know, just one day in court. 200,000 lawyers devising modifications and amendments to laws and working for Congress and changing, you know, the bureaucracy, the Kafkaesque world they have created is so onerous, obnoxious, and unbearable to most of the citizenry that everybody bitches about the government at least part of the time. Ergo, the government knows they are not well loved, and they're wondering how many of us are joining militias or forming revolutionary communist parties like those nuts down in the South, or doing something else racist to overthrow. So they got to keep spying on us to make sure we're not getting too ornery. And the more the people discover the government is spying on them, the more they distrust the government.
So does that vicious circle end up going anywhere?
Well, it produces what I call rigidicus bureaucraticus, which is where all brain activity ceases. That's due to the Snafu Principle.
What's the Snafu Principle?
I was working for an engineering firm, and it was quite clear to me that what the engineers wanted to do and what management wanted to do were two different things, and management never listened to the engineers because they thought they all really wanted to be physicists, and they settled for being engineers because they didn't have enough money to go through postgraduate work and so on, but they really want to go to the moon and do all sorts of impossible things. And we're here to see that they do things that make money. Whereas the engineer's attitude is those people are only bean counters, and they don't realize how much more money they can make if they let us do the creative things we're thinking about. But the engineers can never get that through because the management was above the engineers. And so the engineers knew what management was thinking, but management didn't know what the engineers were thinking. And then I happened to read Kropotkin's Mutual Aid as a Factor in Evolution, in which he talked about how he became an anarchist. Kropotkin was a prince of the Romanov family, related to the Romanov family.
To the Tsar, in fact.
Yeah, related to the Tsar, yeah. And he was an amateur scientist, and he made a lot of important discoveries in geology and related sciences. He was sent to do some surveying work in Siberia. He discovered all the laws passed in Moscow for commerce on the rivers were being broken every day, because the people who did the commerce on the rivers had discovered that they tried to obey the laws, they couldn't do any business at all. The laws were so complex, intricate, baroque, and czarist in general that you just couldn't obey them. They clogged the system. Nothing could be done. So people just casually disregarded the laws and went about doing their business. And Kropotkin thought that over for a long time and decided that's the way it is in hierarchical organizations. When the people involved in a process aren't making their own game rules, when somebody 1,000 miles away is making the game rules, things are going to be all screwed up unless the people just are far enough away that the guy making the rules can't find out they're not following the rules. If we had a primitive communication system in America today like they had in Russia in Kropotkin's day, everybody in California who needed medical marijuana would be using it, and Clinton wouldn't have found out about it and sent the feds in to start throwing them in jail. The only way any system survives is if the people who are in the actual situations can make their own rules, and somebody, bureaucrats 1,000 miles away, don't know anything about it. And this leads to what I call the burden of nescience. If you're at the bottom of the hierarchy, anything you sense, smell, hear, see, intuit, feel, anything that registers on your nervous system can be reported to those above you only if it suits their prejudices. If it doesn't suit their prejudices, you shouldn't report it to them because A, they may order a court-martial if you're in the Army, they may write a pink slip if you're working for a corporation, or they may put you on trial for treason if you really annoyed them, or if you live in a Catholic country, you might get called up before the Inquisition and burned at the stake, etc. So as you go up the hierarchy, there's more and more facts that cannot be reported to the next highest level. So at the very top of the pyramid, there's the people who have all the power and don't know anything except what suits their prejudices, because nobody dares to tell them anything they don't want to hear. Meanwhile, those at the bottom of the pyramid have this burden of nescience where they're not supposed to know, think, feel, sense, or in any way make any decisions of their own. They're the ones who are actually running all the machinery and the boats and the factories and everything. And I realized that's why the snafu was coined in the Army. The Army is the most rigidified form of this type of authoritarian structure. Nobody who makes any decisions knows anything about what's actually going on, where the decisions are being carried out, which is why the word snafu was coined in the Army. Situation normal, all fucked up. Well, that's the normal situation in any authoritarian pyramid, which is another reason why power corrupts. It's not just that power brings out the worst in people, but it's that when the higher you get, the less you find out about what you're actually supposed to be doing. You're supposed to be governing something, but you can't find out what it is that you're governing. There was an actual case in the Carter regime where a guy predicted when they were holding the hostages in Iran, there was this attempted rescue mission which got all botched up. There was one guy in the Carter administration who opposed that and said it couldn't work and explained on military and technological grounds why it was going to be a fiasco. And then they tried it anyway and it was a fiasco, and guess who got fired? He did. Jimmy Carter just couldn't stand having somebody on his staff who had been proven to be smarter than he was about just one issue, not about everything in general. Jimmy Carter was a pretty smart guy for a president, but just one issue. This guy who was right when Carter was wrong was more than Carter could stand, so he had to leave the government. And so more and more the people at the top don't know anything about what they're supposed to be controlling.
So you said that modern Americans don't trust the government almost at all. How well do they trust the media?
Well, according to an article in the Christian Science Monitor a couple of years ago, it's pretty much around the same level as distrust of the government. It's around 3 out of 4 Americans don't trust the corporate media anymore. And of course, nobody trusts internet, not even the people who use it. All we know about internet is that you get any opinion you want, and then you're going to have to research a lot of craziness before you find any accurate data. But that's all to the good, because that's the way the universe is constructed anyway. If it wasn't for Aristotle, perhaps we all would have grown up sane, realizing that we're always gambling and we're never sure of anything. And that would make us all a lot more tentative and a lot more careful, and we do a lot less stupid things. But Aristotle created this true-false dichotomy, and everybody immediately decided what they want to believe is true and what the people they don't like want to believe is false, and we've been at war with each other ever since. How's that for a gross oversimplification? Well, I think it's partly true anyway. We're gambling all the time. Nobody has a guarantee that they have the truth.
Do you think that we're now drifting towards a situation that resembles something out of the art of Kafka or Orwell?
I think we've gone beyond Kafka and Orwell. Neither Kafka nor Orwell have ever invented anything like the piss police. That is so surrealistic. I would suspect Salvador Dali faked his death and took over the United States government if there wasn't so much evidence against that hypothesis. Imagine a country built on the idea of individual liberty where you can't hold a job without giving a urine sample at random intervals under a constitution that prohibits random searches. You got to go before a magistrate and prove evidence you think that a crime has been committed and why you think so. A cop has to fill out a form and show what crime he thinks was committed, why he thinks this guy committed it, why he thinks evidence might be found in that place. That's the traditional constitutional system. We got random searches of our houses, random searches of our bladders, and people think this is a constitutional democracy. I say it's a czarist government, and anybody who can study history can see it has nothing in common with the U.S. Constitution and everything in common with the situation in 19th century Russia.
So back to conspiracy theory. What do you mean when you use the term conspiracy coincidence syndrome?
Actually, I forget where I first encountered that idea, but I was working for Playboy, and somebody submitted an article. I think I was the only editor who voted for publishing the article. And it was about this thing. This guy set out to investigate conspiracy theorists. And he investigated a variety of them, those who thought the Rockefellers ran the government, those who thought the Air Force was engaged in a cover-up of the UFOs, and I forget what others, about 3 others. He found all of them had real incidents that they could demonstrate to his conviction that they weren't making it up, that they had been persecuted, which helped prove that their conspiracy theory must be true, or why would they be persecuted? And I began to think, well, I don't exactly believe in psychokinesis, but I do believe that we program what happens to us a lot more than we're consciously aware of. And it occurred to me that if people who believe widely conflicting conspiracy theories get equally persecuted, they're bringing the persecution down on themselves in some way they don't understand. And that led me into the whole concept of coincidence and synchronicity, and some of it is pretty damn weird. You can't explain it in any rational terms. Well, take Mae Brussell. Her daughter got killed in a car accident. she thought the CIA did that. Now, my attitude is so many kids get killed in car accidents that to immediately jump to the conclusion the CIA did it is kind of premature. And if the CIA wanted to shut Mae Brussel up, the obvious thing to do would be to kill her, not her daughter. But then you find things that are really weird, like Kerry Thornley, who believed he was brainwashed by the CIA and was part of the Kennedy assassination, but he couldn't remember all the details. He got held up in his own apartment by a guy who, after pistol whipping him and taking a stereo and a television and a few other things he carted away, he took Kerry's ID with him, too. Now, why did he steal Kerry Thornley's ID? Maybe that's another coincidence, like Mae Brussel's daughter being hit by a car. And the more you look into it, the more mysterious it gets. John Lilly, Dr. John Lilly, who has a background in more sciences than just about anybody I can think of, he has coined the metaphor. He insists it's a metaphor because he doesn't want to be known as a nut. I also call it a metaphor because I still have some faint hope that I won't be known as a nut. Cosmic Coincidence Control Center, CCCC. It does seem like Cosmic Coincidence Control Center pays special attention to people who pay special attention to it. The more coincidences you look for, the more you find. And the more you look for coincidences, the more you find the really weird ones that seem like synchronicities. As, for example, the 23 theme that runs through several of my books. I was giving a lecture in St. Louis. Guy came up after the lecture with his wife, chatted with me a bit and said, I know how your 23 gimmick works. I said, okay, tell me. He said, it's a neurological grid. You make your readers abnormally conscious of 23s and they ignore all the other numbers. And I said, congratulations, you found the great magician who makes the grass green. According to Zen Buddhism, you are now enlightened. And then after a while, we decided we got to have a friendly chat. We decided to go get a pizza. We went to this pizza place. They give you a number while you wait for your pizza. Of course, we got number 23. He said, how do you do it? And I said, thought you did it that time. I mean, when this kind of thing starts haunting you, you find out that any philosophy you can invent fails to account for it. Synchronicity isn't a theory at all. It's a word that Jung made up and pretended he had a theory to go with it, but in the scientific sense, there is no theory of synchronicity. It's just a label for a phenomenon that tends to occur when you're in depth analysis, Freudian or Jungian, when you do a lot of LSD, or if you do a lot of Oriental meditation, or if you practice Western Kabbalistic magic. And it happens to ordinary people too, but it happens much more likely if you belong to one of those 5 groups. If you belong to all 5 of those groups, the synchronicities accumulate so much that you start to think, to quote Aleister Crowley, the whole universe is an individual dealing of God with your personal soul.
So when one starts investigating conspiracies, suddenly, by the same principle, facts backing up the conspiracy seem to pop from the woodwork?
Oh, yeah. It's like the Law of Fives, created by Kerry Thornley before he started remembering or imagining his connection with the CIA and brainwashing programs and so on. The Law of Fives holds that everything in the universe is directly connected to the number 5. Sometimes I restate it as given enough ingenuity on the part of the interpreter, but usually I leave that out and leave it in Kerry's form and leave the reader to figure it out for himself. But take, for instance, 666, the number of the beast. How the hell is that connected to 5? Well, add it up. 666, it adds to 18. 18, 1 plus 8 equals 9. 9 is 3 squared. There you got your 3 and your 2. 3 plus 2 equals 5. You see how easy it is? That only took 3 steps.
So because the mind is searching for those kind of connections, it's putting them together wherever it can.
Yeah, I'd like to do a book sometime on great blunders by intelligent people, because when you start looking for something, you tend to find, this wouldn't be like Simon Newcomb, the great astronomer who wrote a mathematical proof that heavier-than-air flight was impossible and published it a day before the Wright brothers took off. I'm talking about people who found a pattern in nature and wrote several scientific articles and got it accepted by a large part of the scientific community before it was generally agreed that there was no such pattern. It was all just selective perception. This happens over and over. And if it happens to scientists, imagine how much more often it happens to artists.
Can you give us an example of one or two conspiracies that you actually think are probably true?
The Kennedy assassination. I've never been satisfied with the Warren Commission. None of the Kennedy assassination buffs have convinced me that they got the right explanation, but I do feel there was some fiddle-faddle going on there, especially in relation to the wounds. You can't read the report from Parkman General Hospital at Dallas and the report from Bethesda in Maryland that evening without seeing the body was altered. The Parkman wounds, as described by them, seemed to fit what the doctors there thought it was. 2 shots from the front. The Bethesda wound seemed to fit the Warren Commission theory of 3 shots from the rear. And the body was altered. The wounds changed their size, they changed their location. I don't claim to know who did it or why or anything like that. That's where every Kennedy assassination buff loses me. After they knock holes in the official theory, then they give their own theory, which doesn't sound any more plausible than the official theory. I don't know what happened, but I think there was a lot of deception of the public going on at that time. One theory I have considered, which most conspiracy buffs don't like because it's too tame, maybe all that was going on was that Oswald, like quite a few other defectors, genuinely defected to Russia, let's say, as a hypothesis. We can make a more complicated one. He only pretended to defect and was working for the CIA all along. But let's say he genuinely defected. He got disillusioned. He wanted to get out of Russia. He went to the State Department. They said, we'll help you get out, but in return, you got to work for us and pretend you're working for the KGB when you go back to the States. And so he's working for the KGB and the CIA at the same time. This is very common in espionage. It goes on all the time, the double agent system. Licio Gelli was working for the Gestapo and the Communist Underground, both during the Second World War. In the 1970s, while he was running the Pay Due Gladio conspiracy out of Rome, he was being paid by both the CIA and the KGB. This is very common. So Oswald comes back, he's working for 2 intelligence agencies, and for one reason or another, he cracks up, he gets pissed off, whatever you want to say, he decides to commit an assassination, and he does it. Everybody's trying to cover up his connection with their agency, and so all the evidence gets twisted around to cover up the connection with their intelligence agency. And there was no conspiracy at all, except a conspiracy to conceal the fact that he was working for more than one intelligence agency. That's a minimalist Kennedy assassination conspiracy theory. I know a lot more dramatic ones than that, but they don't quite convince me. That one doesn't convince me either, but it's more plausible than most, I think.
What other cases can you come up with that you feel are probably true?
On the scale of 1 to 10, I would put around 9.5, the closest to the absolute truth in my system. I've thought that the government of the United States and most other governments, quite a few other governments, are largely controlled by the rich. And the democratic elections do not change anything because you're offered always a choice between 2 people, or as I say these days, my latest terminology, 2 lying bastards, both of whom are in the bag to the same major corporation. So it doesn't matter which one of them you vote for, the major corporations are going to be running the government. Like I said, I give that a 9.5. Maybe somebody got elected without getting millions of dollars from the major corporations, but I haven't heard of it. Usually the third-party candidates who don't get contributions from the big corporations, they not only don't get on the major media, but the major media mentions them only in passing to say third parties never win. That's the only thing you ever hear about third parties on television. It's about the only thing you ever read in news, but third parties never win. That's not true. We've had several cases in American history where third parties emerged as the new second party. But they keep telling us third parties never win, and they don't let us hear what the third parties are saying because they want us to be stuck with not a choice but a dilemma, to quote John Anderson, between 2 guys who are both in the bag to the same major corporation. So whichever one we elect, the corporations will still be running the country.
Bob, how do you find that conspiracy theory is related to literature?
Well, I suppose most of the epics have a conspiracy theory in them. The Odyssey is all about Odysseus's attempts to get home and Poseidon's endless conspiracy to get him stuck on one island or another where he can't get home from. The The Divine Comedy is all about Satan's conspiracy against God's plan. So is Paradise Lost. Conspiracy is a constant theme in Shakespeare. The history plays, the tragedies. It reaches the point in Hamlet where Hamlet has one of the shortest speeches in Shakespeare. Seeming. Nobody knows what's real anymore. There's so many conspiracies going on in Denmark, you know. And of course conspiracy is very big in modern literature, even before Illuminatus. It's in all of Pynchon's novels. If you read them all, they're all different aspects of the same gigantic conspiracy, which is never quite identified. Of course, Moby Dick can be regarded as a conspiracy theory. As Ahab says, be the white whale principle or the white whale agent, I will wreak my vengeance upon him. He's not sure that the white whale is the source of malice or the white whale is just an agent of some supernatural source of malice. But in either case, the whale is the visible target. All visible things are but masks, as Ahab says. Now, there's a good motto for a conspiracy theorist. All visible things are but masks. That's for the more occult conspiracy theories.
Do you think it works the other way around, where conspiracy theory can contribute to or inform literature in some way?
Well, by the time you get to Hamlet, you've entered what Mary McCarthy very intelligently called epistemological tragedy. The whole problem of Hamlet is trying to find out what's real. Can you trust the ghost? Is he a goblin damned who is trying to lead Hamlet to his own destruction? Or is he really the ghost of Hamlet's father? Or is he just a hallucination because Hamlet is losing his mind? And then there's the more vital question raised by Oscar Wilde. Are the commentators on Hamlet really mad or only pretending to be mad? I think conspiracy theory is a very good training for thinking in non-absolute categories. Of course, most conspiracy theorists never get there. They think in absolute categories. They have the one true conspiracy theory. But if you study conspiracy theory from a sort of anthropological angle, which I sort of think is what I'm doing, at least that's the way I define it for myself, it's a great learning experience. You compare one conspiracy theory with another and see which ones are the nuttiest and which ones seem the most plausible. And you find the ones that seem most plausible have their nutty elements in them, too. It's like urban folklore. It's like reading the weekly world news. You run into these things that are so crackpot you can't believe that anybody could possibly have actually printed them and circulated them. Like Our Lady of the Flowers in Long Island, I forget where. One of those little cities in Long Island, there's this woman who channels the Blessed Virgin Mary, and she announced that the Vatican has been taken over by Satanists, and Archbishop Lefebvre should be the next pope, and that Jesus himself invented AIDS because he was so pissed off at the gay community. And because Jesus invented it, science will never find a cure for it. And I would love to see that with a cartoon of Jesus with one of those cute little white gowns they always have him wearing and a couple of test tubes, cackling like the mad scientist in an 80s movie. Say, this will kill off a few million of those goddamn fags.
Do you have any other favorite theories that you've heard recently?
Well, besides Lyndon LaRoche's theory that I am the head of the Illuminati, Lyndon has also contributed the absolutely wonderful, one of my all-time favorites of the field of nut theories. Queen Elizabeth personally sent Alan Watts and Aldous Huxley to the United States to corrupt us with Oriental religions and drugs.
What's the payoff for her? I'm just curious.
Then Britain will become the major power again after we've been destroyed by Oriental religions and drugs. And you can see we're being destroyed faster every day, right? You know, everybody says when they talk about religious tolerance, we're all equal, Protestant, Catholic, or Jew. And yet the curious thing is that there are more Buddhists in this country now than Jews. Protestants in first place, Catholics second, agnostics third, Buddhists fourth, Jews fifth. And then we got the Hindus and the Sikhs and the Mormons. But anyway, agnostics are pretty high up. And since I'm somewhere between an agnostic and a Buddhist, I'm somewhere between third and fourth place. I'm ahead of the Jews anyway. Oh, yeah, then there's the Christians Awake in Birmingham, Alabama. They believe Ronald Reagan not only was not a real conservative, he was actually a gay Freemason. And he was the head of a gay Freemasonic conspiracy which was secretly engaged in filling the government with communist agents and pretending to oppose abortion while actually strengthening the power of the abortionists.
God, it all makes sense now.